senators, and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of
Welcome to
presenting
another episode of Mr. Hutchings History, the podcast that helps students and teachers navigate the world of research, critical thinking, and academic success. I'm your host, Mr. Hutchings, and today we're tackling an important question. What's the difference between searching and researching? If you've ever typed a question into Google, you've engaged in searching, but does that mean you're researching? Not quite. Understanding the difference between the two can take your academic work from surface level to insightful and impactful. Whether you're a student working on a history paper or a teacher guiding research projects, mastering this difference is essential. Let's use this episode to break this down. So, what is searching? Let's start with something we do every day: searching. You open Google, type in a question like, "When did World War II end?" And within seconds, you have an answer: September 2, 1945. Boom, done. The key traits of searching include quick fact-finding, usually a single search query, relies on popular search engines like Google, limited evaluation of sources, and often open for casual inquiries, recipes, movie reviews, news updates. An example: imagine you're writing a paper on the causes of the Cold War. You search causes of the Cold War and click on the first result, probably a wiki page or general history website. That's searching. It gives you a surface level answer, but you're not digging deeper into the complexity of the issue. Common mistakes in searching, and I'm going to show how to fix them. So, a common mistake is relying on the first result. Many students assume the top search result is the best one, but search engines prioritize popular content, not necessarily the most credible sources. A solution to this is scroll beyond the first few results. Use tools like Google Scholar or library databases for higher quality materials. Another mistake is using vague or overly broad search terms. Searching Cold War will give millions of results, making it hard to find focused, relevant sources. A solution: be specific. Try economic causes of the Cold War or Cold War US-Soviet relations. Another mistake: not verifying the credibility of the source. Just because a website looks professional doesn't mean it's reliable. Many students unknowingly use biased or inaccurate sources. A solution: check the author's credentials, the publication date, and whether the information is backed by any evidence. There are alternative search strategies that I can suggest to you. Use Boolean operators. Search smarter by using and, or, and not. For example, Cold War and economic causes. This ensures that both terms appear in your search results. Cold War or US-Soviet tensions. This broadens your results to find either Cold War or US-Soviet tensions as topics. Cold War, not Cuban Missile Crisis. This will remove specific topics. You'll get results on the Cold War which exclude topics which include the Cuban Missile Crisis. Use specialized search engines. Instead of Google, try Google Scholar, Gestor, or the Library of Congress archives for academic resources. Use advanced search filters. Many search engines allow filtering by date, source type, or domain, such as .edu, .gov, .org, for more reliable content. Boolean operators are special words, and, or, and not, that help refine and improve search results when using search engines, library databases, or academic research tools. So I know I just probably introduced the idea of what a Boolean operator is to many people in this audience who may have never heard this before. So let me explain how Boolean operators work. A Boolean operator, uh, they work by structuring searches so that the system retrieves only the most relevant results. Here's how each one functions. The first Boolean operator is the word and. And helps narrows your search. Using and, this operator ensures that all search terms appear in the results. Example, Cold War and economic causes. The results would be articles that mention both the Cold War and economic causes, but exclude those results that only mention one or the other. So in this way, using and narrows your search by combining terms which must be found by the search engine. The second Boolean operator is the word or. This broadens your search. This operator allows results that contain either of the search terms, making the search broader. An example, Cold War or US-Soviet tensions. The results of this search would be articles containing either Cold War or US-Soviet tensions, or even both, increasing the number of potential sources. The third and last Boolean operator is the word not, and this excludes specific results. This operator removes certain words from the search filter to remove irrelevant topics. An example, Cold War, not Cuban Missile Crisis. The results of this search would be articles about the Cold War, but exclude those that mention the Cuban Missile Crisis. Combining Boolean operators provides precision in your search. You can combine multiple Boolean operators to make searches even more specific. An example of such a query would be looking for Cold War and economic causes or ideological causes, not Cuban Missile Crisis. A search query such as this would retrieve sources that discuss the Cold War and its economic or ideological causes while filtering out anything related to the Cuban Missile Crisis. It seems like a lot, doesn't it? But it really does improve your search queries. Common mistakes and solutions while using the Booleans. One common mistake is forgetting parentheses in complex searches. A solution is to use parentheses to clarify which terms should be grouped. For example, Cold War and parentheses Soviet Union or United States, close parentheses. A second mistake, using not too broadly and excluding useful sources. Solution, instead of eliminating an entire topic, try filtering with academic databases for specific aspects. A third mistake, assuming all databases use Boolean logic. Solution, some search engines work differently. Always check their advanced search help pages to understand which operators work best. Why Boolean operators matter. Using Boolean operators make research faster, more precise, and more effective, saving you from sitting through thousands of irrelevant results. Mastering Boolean operators helps students and teachers conduct more strategic searches, whether for history papers, academic projects, or general research. Would you like to practice using Boolean operators? Try creating a search query and test it in Google Scholar or your school's library database. I'm not going to suggest that this is particularly easy to do when you first begin using Boolean operators. But practice, practice, practice. Ask for advice. Speak to your teacher. Speak to a librarian. As you get better with using Boolean operators in your searches, Your search becomes closer to research, and it will infinitely improve the work that you do. Trust me, I do it all the time. I did mention earlier about using domain types to help find better material. And so I'd like to address if does domain types such as edu, .gov, and .org really correlate to more reliable content? The short answer is sometimes, but not always. Many students are taught that .edu, .gov, and .org domains are more reliable than .com sites. But domain alone is not a foolproof measure of credibility. While these domains can often provide authoritative information, they are not immune to bias, outdated content, or selective perspectives. Let me explain. What do different domains really mean? A website's domain suffix, or top-level domain, sometimes abbreviated to TLD, provides clues about its intended purpose, but it doesn't guarantee accuracy or neutrality. Here's what each major domain type typically represents. .edu, short for education, represents universities and research institutions. .edu is used by accredited colleges, universities, and research institutions, often includes scholarly research, academic papers, and educational materials. However, some .edu pages are student projects or opinion pieces, so not everything on a .edu site is peer-reviewed or fact-checked. An example of reliability of a .edu is a research paper published by Harvard University. An example of a limitation of a .edu is a student's personal blog hosted on their university's website, and the personal blog may not be credible. .gov, short for government, exclusively used by the United States and their government agencies. .govs provide laws, regulations, statistics, and official policy information. Generally considered reliable, but government agencies have political agendas that shape the way information is presented. An example of a reliable .edu is data from the U.S. Census Bureau or Center of Disease Control, often abbreviated as the CDC. Information from these data centers are really considered pretty reliable. An example of a limitation of a .edu would be an historical interpretation on government sites. Any historical interpretation on government sites may emphasize national narratives that exclude certain perspectives. A .org organizations usually belong to nonprofits and advocacy groups. Originally intended for nonprofits, .orgs today can be really registered by just about anyone. In fact, they can be registered by anyone. Often used by charities, advocacy groups, think tanks, and professional organizations, many .orgs could have well-researched papers but they also reflect ideological biases of either the researchers or the research organization. An example of a reliable .org would be information on the American Cancer Society's website. That would be reliable for cancer concerns. But an example of a limitation of a .org, a political advocacy group's websites might selectively present information to support its political agenda. .com, commercial. This is the most common domain, open to anyone, and most common with businesses, news, and general public. This will include news websites, company pages, blogs, and e-commerce sites. Some .com sites are highly credible, or considered highly credible, such as the New York Times, BBC, National Geographic, but others are clickbait-driven, biased, or purely commercial. It's often accepted that a reliable .com would be the Wall Street Journal's website, but a limited .com would be a blog claiming miracle health cures to sell supplements. And finally, the .net, which just means network. And this is a miscellaneous and it's often tech related. They're originally meant for tech companies and ISPs, but are now used very, very broadly. They often include forums, personal blogs, and tech-related sites. An example of reliability in a .NET site would be a software company's official site if you're looking at information on that software. An example of a limitation of a .NET would be a website which is a conspiracy theory blog hosted on a .NET domain. Can anyone purchase any type of domain? No, but some domains are easier to obtain than others. .gov and .edu domains have strict regulations. Only government agencies or accredited institutions can register a .gov or .edu. However, .org, .com, and .net are open to anyone, which means a .org site could be a respected nonprofit or a propaganda group. Fun fact, some deceptive organizations intentionally use .org to appear more credible, even if they're not nonprofits. So the values and limitations of using domains types to vet information. Well, for credibility, some domains like .gov and .edu are typically more trustworthy. However, a university site such as .edu could host unreliable information, particularly if it's a student blog. If you're concerned about bias detection, knowing an organization's domain type can help identify potential biases. Many .org sites have strong ideological leanings, even if they seem neutral. If you would like to vet the authority of the site, official government data from a .gov is usually pretty accurate. However, government sites may omit controversial information to fit policy narratives. And if you're concerned about accuracy, university research sites often provide peer-reviewed materials. However, research funding sources, which could be corporations or government grants, can influence the findings of the research which is published. So, what are the common biases that are found in the different domain types? Because even reliable sources can carry bias, either in the way they choose to include or what they choose to leave out. Common biases in EDU websites. Professors and researchers may favor specific theories or methodologies while not mentioning others or simply having different results because of different methodologies. University-sponsored studies might align with the institution's funding interests. This is a very typical follow the money type of concern. If someone's paying for your research, you normally don't offend your funder. So that's something always you have to look for in university-funded material. It is not without bias. Student-generated content can reflect opinion rather than established fact. Often the case. I'm a teacher. I enjoy all my students, but as part of the learning process, established fact may not be the focus of a student paper, whether it's a paper that's handed in or a paper that is published. Just a fact of learning. Okay, there are multiple examples of biases in EDU websites stemming from professor preferences, institutional funding, and student-generated content. Here are some concrete cases I can share with you. Here's a case of professors following specific theories or methodologies. And this example involves economic schools of thought. A Harvard economics professor's research might emphasize Keynesian economics, advocating for government intervention, while a professor of the University of Chicago may promote free market neoliberal policies in line with the Chicago School of Economics. Both of these types of theories can have strongly different opinions on, say, how to handle homelessness or unemployment. It doesn't mean that the professors are wrong. They are certainly different, and their difference is bias. And just simply being aware of it is important. It doesn't mean the papers are inaccurate, but just to read one paper and to say that is the solution is partial learning. If a student relies only on one of the single university's EDU websites for economic research, that student might receive one-sided interpretation of economic policies. So the solution, compare research from multiple universities with different ideological perspectives. My second example involves university-sponsored studies reflecting funding interests. And here it's the pharmaceutical research and industry ties. A university medical research center might publish studies on the effectiveness of a new drug, but if the research was funded by the drug's manufacturer, which often is the case, the study might emphasize positive outcomes while downplaying adverse effects. A real case: studies on opioids funded by pharmaceutical companies in the early 2000s minimized the risk of addiction to the opioids. This contributed to the opioid crisis as many doctors prescribed these opioids to patients without the doctors having a full understanding of the high risk of addiction associated with these opioids. Some of the studies were published on medical school websites without acknowledging the conflict of interest by being funded by the pharmaceutical company. So, a solution: check the funding disclosures in research papers and compare results from independent studies. My third example will be a political and ideological bias that's found in university research. This example will be in historical interpretations of social movements. A history department at a progressive university might frame the 1960s civil rights movement primarily through the lens of grassroots activism and systematic racism. A more conservative university might focus the same 1960s civil rights movement as being successful through legal victories and constitutional progress, rather than emphasizing ongoing systematic inequality. The bias, depending on the institution, the focus may either celebrate progress or highlight ongoing struggles, affecting how students perceive the 1960s civil rights movement. A solution to this bias: seek multiple perspectives, including research from universities in different regions, in different political contexts, and look for information in different international sources. My fourth example, I got a bunch of these because often my concern is people think they found a scholarly article, so it's without bias. It is nothing further from the truth. Scholarly articles have their own types of bias, and it's harder to see. Particularly, it's hard to see if people believe scholarly articles don't have bias. Okay, my fourth example is a student-generated content which can reflect opinion and not fact. And this example is any student research papers published in university repositories online. And there's a lot of them, and they're easily accessible. Many universities store undergraduate and graduate research papers in online databases, often accessible through .edu domains. The issue: unlike peer-reviewed journal articles, these papers may lack rigorous fact-checking, and it can include opinions, errors, and unverified claims. A real case: a student thesis at a major university suggested ancient aliens influenced Egyptian pyramids. While it was uploaded to the university's archive, it was not peer-reviewed or accepted as serious historical research. I know that sounds crazy, but even when you find work at the master's level, say a master's thesis or just an upper graduate paper, or even doctoral research, until it's a doctoral thesis, until it's a doctoral dissertation, until it's published, it is not peer reviewed. And remember, just because someone might be at a higher level of learning than you are, if you're a high school student listening to this, don't be impressed by any accolades. Don't be impressed that someone's in college. Don't be impressed by a master's student. Don't even be impressed by the PhD student. Don't be impressed. Check everything. People are human and they make mistakes. And degrees represent levels of learning, they do not represent levels of perfection. PhDs, those people get it, make a career out of arguing with each other. They don't even agree with each other. They agree with they agree on perhaps solid methodology, but opinions vary, which is why we have so many of them. And to challenge an idea is not disrespectful. Just because you see it on an EDU website, do not take it as fact. A solution, always verify a source, see if it's peer reviewed, look to see if it's authored by an expert as opposed to a student, because if it's merely a student work, particularly coursework, it may be published on the internet, but it is not authoritative. My fifth example is research, which is research focus, which is influenced by institutional priorities. An example is a military versus peace studies research. And this happens often in very rich countries with big defense contracts that universities are looking for. And I'm thinking of Western Europe, China, Russia, the United States. Universities with major defense contracts, such as MIT and Stanford in the United States, often emphasize military technology and security research, while liberal arts-focused institutions, such as Oberlin and Swarthmore, might prioritize peace studies and diplomacy. The bias, the funding of the school, whether they focus on military technology and security or peace studies and diplomacy, this will affect what research gets funding and visibility at that university. Students searching for international relations research on a defense-funded university site might find more studies on military strategy than on peaceful conflict resolution. A solution to this bias is to cross-check military-focused institutions with research from think tanks and diplomacy-centered universities. And finally, my sixth and last example on this is the selective representation of social issues. An example are university archives and indigenous history. Some university archives highlight institutional achievements while downplaying controversial histories. A real case, several Ivy League universities have hidden or downplayed historical ties to slavery and indigenous land dispossession. Some universities now acknowledge these pasts, but many older .edu publications avoid the topic entirely. The bias? Students researching a university's history through its own .edu site may not get the full story. So a solution is to look for independent historical research and primary sources beyond university published content. So my final thought on the domain as a way to vet out credibility. While .edu websites are generally more credible than commercial sites, they are not free from bias. Always consider who funded the research, what perspectives are included or excluded, is the content peer-reviewed or student-generated, how does the university's reputation or ideology shape the research it focuses on. And as a student, have you ever found conflicting information between two universities on the same topic? What's been your experience with .edu sources? Drop a comment in the section. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd be sure to respond. For .gov websites, oh boy, they have common bias. The most common bias that government websites have is to frame historical events in a way that favors national interests. There are multiple examples of government websites emphasizing national narratives while excluding certain perspectives. A few notable cases are the U.S. government and the Vietnam War. The U.S. Department of Defense and other government websites often framed the Vietnam War as a conflict primarily about stopping the spread of communism and protecting democracy. What's missing? Many historians argue that the war was also a civil conflict within Vietnam and that U.S. intervention worsened the situation rather than preserving stability. So look for alternative sources to the U.S. government. Look to the Vietnamese government sources, which portray the war as a fight for national liberation against imperialism. And look for independent historians, which highlight U.S. war crimes and anti war resistance movements in the U.S. The British government and colonial history. The British government websites and official education materials, I'm looking at you, IGSC, key levels, and A level, AS level education. I'm looking at you, British curriculum. The materials from these sites often present colonialism as a civilizing mission which brought infrastructure, law, and governance to colonies. What's missing? The histories of exploitation, forced labor, and indigenous resistance are often downplayed. For instance, the role of Britain in the Bengal famine of 1943 is often minimalized. Look for alternative sources. Look for post colonial scholars and historians from former British colonies to provide more detailed accounts of colonial oppression, economic drain, and resistance movements. There's the Chinese government and Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. Official Chinese government websites either omit or distort the events of Tiananmen Square, describing it as a riot caused by counter-revolutionaries, instead of a pro-democracy movement violently suppressed by the Chinese Communist state. What's missing? The death toll, personal testimonies, and eyewitness accounts from journalists and survivors. So look for alternative sources, Western and independent news sources, declassified U.S. Embassy cables, and personal interviews with Chinese dissidents offer a more complete narrative of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Russia and the Soviet Union's role in World War II. Russian government websites emphasize the Soviet Union's role in defeating Nazi Germany in the Great Patriotic War. That's what they called World War II in Russia. But the Russians downplay the Soviet-Nazi Non-Aggression Pact of 1939, and they downplay the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. What's missing? Historians outside of Russia point to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as an agreement that allowed Hitler to invade Poland without the fear of Soviet intervention. The Soviet Union's own mass deportations and repression in Eastern Europe are often omitted. So, looking for alternative sources, you would look for Polish, Baltic, and Ukrainian historians who can provide more detailed analyses of Soviet occupation policies and how those policies impacted the region. U.S. Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King Jr. U.S. government websites celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. as a peaceful leader advocating for racial equality. What's missing? Many official accounts downplay his anti-war activism, King's criticism of capitalism, and King's socialist-leaning economic ideas. Alternative sources would be historians and activists, which highlight his later years, when King called for systematic economic reforms and was labeled a threat by the FBI. Japan and World War II war crimes. Official Japanese government sources emphasize Japan's post-war recovery and democracy, but often gloss over or minimize the war crimes committed during World War II, such as the Nanjing Massacre or Comfort Women System. What's missing? Detailed discussions of forced labor, biological warfare experiments by Unit 731, and Japan's treatment of prisoners of war. Alternative sources from Chinese, Korean, and Western historians provide more in-depth studies of Japanese wartime actions. Turkey and the Armenian genocide from 1915 to 1917. The Turkish government officially rejects the term genocide when discussing the mass killing of 1.5 million Armenians by the Ottoman Empire. Government websites refer to the events as a tragedy of war rather than a systematic extermination. What's missing? Eyewitness testimonies, international academic research, and resolutions by multiple governments officially recognizing the genocide. Alternative sources: Armenian scholars, independent historical research, and foreign government archive documents. The foreign government archives, which document the planned nature of the massacres. So, the final thought on .gov sites. .gov sites often provide reliable primary data, but they also reflect national interests, selective memory, and political motivations. This is why cross-referencing multiple sources, academic, journalistic, and international, is essential for a complete picture of history. And have you ever come across a government site that seemed to leave out key details? So I'd like to get back to researching. Research takes searching to the next level. Instead of looking for quick answers, you're analyzing multiple sources, comparing perspectives, and drawing conclusions. Researching is not just collecting information, it's about critically engaging with it to develop a deeper understanding of your topic. Imagine research as detective work. A detective doesn't just take the first clue and declare the case closed. Instead, the detective gathers evidence, cross examines the witness, identifies patterns, and constructs a narrative that explains the truth as accurately as possible. That's what good research is about. The key traits of researching involves multiple sources and perspectives. No single article or book gives you the full picture. Use academic databases, books, journals, and primary sources, not just random Google searches. Require the evaluation of source credibility. Where is this information coming from? Who wrote it? What's their bias? Engages in critical thinking and synthesis. How do different perspectives fit together? The iterative process. Research evolves as you discover more. You might start with one question, but end up exploring a slightly different question, and that's okay. An example is a Cold War paper. And this is an example of research in action. Let's say you're writing a history paper on the causes of the Cold War. A researcher might type causes of the Cold War into Google, click on a Wikipedia article, and jot down some notes. That's basic searching, but a researcher takes a much deeper approach. Research goes beyond searching. A researcher would use primary sources. You look up speeches for Harry Truman and Joseph Stalin to see what they were saying at the time. A researcher would examine Cold War propaganda posters. What messages were those posters pushing? A researcher would read declassified government documents to understand behind the scenes diplomacy. The researcher would look for scholarly articles. You'd compare historians' arguments. One historian would argue that the Cold War was about military escalation. Another historian claims that the Cold War was an ideological battle between capitalism and communism. A third historian would emphasize economic tensions between the US and Soviet Union. You, as the researcher, you notice how these perspectives shift based on when the historian wrote them. A historian in 1965 might interpret events differently than the historian in 2023. The researcher would analyze quantitative and qualitative data. You would look at military spending statistics from both the US and USSR. You would examine memoirs from Cold War officials to understand how they perceived each other. The researcher would investigate opposing viewpoints. Soviet sources described the US as an aggressor trying to control global capitalism. Western sources describe the USSR as an expansionist power aiming to spread communism. By cross referencing these perspectives, you begin to form a more nuanced argument. This is research. It's an evolving, strategic process, not just pulling a single convenient answer from the internet. I remember the story of an overwhelmed student, Sarah, a high school senior working on a research paper about the effects of the Industrial Revolution. Sarah started with enthusiasm, but after just an hour of searching, Sarah became overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. One website says industrialization improved wages and technology, while another website said industrialization exploited workers and widened inequality. Sarah's problem? She didn't know how to filter or organize her research. What I asked Sarah to do was to take a step back and structure her research process. I told her step one, read background information in encyclopedias and textbooks to get a basic understanding. I told her the second step was identify key themes: economic growth, labor exploitation, environmental impact. And then step three, organize her data into categories: primary sources, such as workers' diaries, and secondary sources, historian analyses, and statistical data. Once Sarah breaks this down into manageable steps, the research became easier and more focused. There's some common frustration in research. Frustration one, feeling overwhelmed by too much information. Solution, start broad and then narrow down. Begin with textbook summaries or encyclopedia entries before diving into complex academic articles. Use mind maps to categorize themes. This visually organizes key ideas. And don't try to read every single source. Identify 5 to 7 key sources that offer a range of perspectives. Frustration 2, struggling to find reliable sources. The solution, use school library databases like Gestor, Google Scholar, or Project Muse instead of just Google. Search for books and peer-reviewed journal articles, not just blogs or opinion pieces. Verify the credibility of the source by checking who wrote it. Is this person or organization an expert in the field? Where was this published? A scholarly journal or a random website? When was it written? Is it current or is it outdated? This could refer to the data or perspective. An example, if you're researching climate change, a peer-reviewed article from a climate scientist is a credible source, and it will hold more weight than an opinion blog from a non-expert, which is going to be a less reliable source. A third frustration is conflicting information from different sources. Your solution? Compare multiple perspectives and cross-check facts from different sources. If two sources disagree, ask why. If one source written from a is one source written from a specific political or ideological perspective? Is one source using outdated data while the other source relies on newer research? Look for consensus among experts. If multiple credible sources agree, that's a good indicator of reliability. If one source says ancient Egyptians built pyramids using alien technology, but every archaeologist cites human engineering techniques, you should know which one is more credible. A fourth frustration is not knowing when to stop researching. A solution? Set clear research goals. Define what you need before you start. Once you find multiple sources that support a well-rounded argument, move to writing. Avoid the endless search trap. If you keep looking for more sources but aren't adding new insights, it's time to stop searching and start analyzing. If you're researching the effects of the Great Depression and you already have statistics, personal accounts, and economic analysis, reading one more article won't drastically change your argument. So, final thoughts on why research matters. Good research is about collecting random is isn't about Good research isn't about collecting random facts, it's about understanding different perspectives, developing critical thinking skills, building strong, well-supported arguments. Research prepares you for college and beyond. In the real world, decision-making, problem-solving, and informed opinions all rely on research skills. Have you ever struggled with a research paper? What's been your biggest challenge? Finding sources, organizing information, or dealing with conflicting perspectives? Let me know. So, AI in searching and researching. Artificial intelligence, AI, is transforming how we find and analyze information. But is it a tool for research or just another search engine? Using AI for searching. AI tools like ChatGPT or Google Bard provide quick summaries and direct answers. They synthesize information from multiple sources, but they don't fact check in real time. They can introduce biases based on their training data. Using AI for researching. AI can help brainstorm research questions or suggest sources, but can't replace deep analysis. AI generated text lacks citations unless specifically programmed to include them. Academic institutions often prohibit AI generated content in formal research due to accuracy concerns. Limitations and concerns of using AI. AI models may fabricate sources. Be sure to verify references before using them. AI tools rely on pre 2021 data for most models, meaning the research you receive from AI can be outdated. Bias exists in AI generated responses as they are trained on imperfect data. There are multiple examples of how bias exists in AI generated responses as they are trained on this imperfect data. The first bias is historical bias in AI outputs. AI models trained on historical data may reflect outdated societal biases. If an AI is asked to summarize historical leaders, it might prioritize Western male figures over equally influential women or non Western leaders due to an imbalance in historical records. A second bias is the political bias in AI generated content. AI can unknowingly favor certain political perspectives based on the source it was trained on. If an AI is trained primarily on Western US news outlets, the summary from the AI of global conflicts will align with Western perspectives while underrepresenting alternative viewpoints from non Western sources. A third bias is the scientific and medical biases. AI might prioritize widely accepted medical theories over emerging or controversial research, limiting access to alternative viewpoints. If asked about nutrition, the AI might favor Western dietary guidelines and overlook non Western traditional diets that may have been scientifically validated but underrepresented in major research databases. The fourth bias is in gender and racial representations. AI generated search results can reinforce gender or racial stereotypes. When generating images or job related descriptions, AI has historically depicted nurses as women and engineers as men, reflecting biases in its training. The fifth bias, there's a lot of them that AI has, is censorship and informational control. AI chatbots often filter politically sensitive topics based on the policies of the organization that develops them. Some AI models avoid discussing Tiananmen Square or controversial government policies in authoritarian countries due to restrictions on available training data. Sixth, AI hallucinations, fake or fabricated information. AI sometimes fabricates sources on data points that don't exist but sound credible. A student asks AI for historical documents on Napoleon's battle strategies, and the AI invents fake book titles and citations that look real but cannot be found in any library. 7. Biases in AI generated search priorities. AI generated summaries often prioritize popular or widely cited sources, overlooking niche or unrepresented research. In searching for economic policies in Africa, AI might overrepresent Western financial organizations such as the IMF and World Bank, while underrepresenting local African economic think tanks. And eighth and last on this list is the confirmation bias in AI based research assistants. AI can unintentionally reinforce a user's existing beliefs instead of presenting a balanced view. If a student asks, "Why is the moon landing fake?" the AI may retrieve sources that support the conspiracy rather than presenting the overwhelming evidence against the fake moon landing being a real thing. All right, solutions to mitigate AI bias. Cross-check AI responses with primary sources and academic databases. Use AI as a starting point, not the final source of truth. Seek multiple perspectives to counteract potential biases, and be aware of AI's limitations as its tendency to prioritize mainstream narratives. How to use AI responsibly in research? Use AI as a brainstorming tool, not the final source. Cross check any claims with academic sources. Treat suggestions from AI as a starting point. Don't treat it as definitive research. Have you ever tried using AI for research? What was your experience like? Share it in comments. So, why does all of this matter? Students often rely too much on Google searches and relying increasingly on AI when writing essays or preparing presentations. And listen, Google is a fantastic tool and AI is amazing. They're fast, it's convenient, and can point you in the right direction. But there's a catch. Google and AI doesn't guarantee that what you're reading is accurate, unbiased, or scholarly. Too many students fall into the trap of taking the first search result as fact without questioning where the information comes from. And this can lead to weak arguments, misinformation, and lower grades. So, why does research matter? Why should you go beyond the first search result? Academic integrity is number one. Your reputation as a scholar. Your teachers and professors expect well researched arguments backed by credible sources, not just random facts pulled from Wikipedia. Using unreliable sources, or worse, copying and pasting information without verification, can lead to plagiarism. Whether intentional or accidental, this is a serious academic offense. Loss of your credibility. When your arguments are based on weak or biased sources, your arguments crumble under scrutiny. Lower grades. Teachers often deduct points for lack of proper citations or poor research. I remember a oops, I plagiarized story. Josh, a high school junior who waited until the last minute to write his paper on the causes of World War I. In a rush, Josh Googled what caused World War I and clicked on the first website he saw. It had a long, detailed summary, so he copied chunks of the text, changed a few words, and submitted his paper to me. The next week, Josh got his essay back with a huge red zero and a note, plagiarized content from the 1914 website. Please see me after class. Josh was shocked. He thought changing a few words was enough. But I explained, Josh did not cite his sources properly. The website wasn't a scholarly source, it was a random blog with no credibility. Josh's argument lacked original thought, and it was just regurgitated facts. The facts are correct, but there was no original thought. Moral of the story, your work needs to be yours. Research is about understanding a topic, forming your own perspective, and using sources to support your argument. It's not just copying information. Always cite your sources properly using MLA, APA, or Chicago, whichever your teacher requires. Use academic databases instead of just Google. Summarize information in your own words and add your analysis. Critical thinking. Research trains your brain to think deeper. Good research forces you to question, analyze, and synthesize ideas instead of just accepting whatever information you find at face value. Instead of just summarizing, you evaluate biases, credibility, and historical content. There's an example I have of misinformation from online historical sources. Imagine you're researching the American Civil War. You Google causes of the Civil War, and you find a website claiming the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. It was purely about states' rights. Sounds convincing, right? But wait. Before accepting it as a fact, a good researcher would check multiple sources. Does this claim match what historians and primary sources say? Analyze the bias. Who wrote this? Is this from a historical journal or from a politically motivated website? Look at primary sources. What did Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, or the Confederate leaders actually say about slavery in their own words? The verdict? A closer look at official Confederate documents and Lincoln's speeches will reveal that slavery was a central cause of the war. The claim you found on Google was a misrepresentation of history. There's a lesson. Never assume that one source tells the full truth. Always cross-check, verify, and think critically. Compare at least 3 to 5 sources before accepting something as fact. Look for peer-reviewed articles, government archives, and university research. And ask yourself, who wrote this? Why did they write it? And what was their agenda? What was their purpose? What's the objective? And research leads you to better grades, stronger essays, stronger arguments. When you put in the effort to research properly, your writing becomes more convincing. You back up your arguments with solid evidence. It's more insightful. You engage with multiple perspectives instead of just repeating the same basic points. It's more original. Teachers and professors will appreciate when students go beyond the obvious answers. I knew someone who was able to turn a C plus into an A. This is a great turnaround story. This woman, I'll call her Emma. So, Emma, she used to get C plus grades on her research papers because she relied on quick Google searches and didn't dig any deeper. Sure, she was passing class, but she wanted higher grades. So one day I gave her this feedback. Emma, your paper is fine, but it's surface level. You need more depth. Instead of just summarizing what happened, ask why it happened, look at primary sources, challenge the arguments you find. So the next time, Emma took a different approach. Instead of using Google, she went to the library databases at school. Instead of just reading one article, she compared 5 different sources. Instead of just saying the Great Depression was bad, she analyzed why some economists blamed the stock market crash, while other historians blamed banking failures. The result? She got an A. The lesson? The more effort you put into your research, the better your work becomes. Use a variety of sources. Don't rely on just one. Ask deeper questions, not just what happened, but why did it happen? Why are different perspectives on this? Or what are the different perspectives on this? Organize your notes so your argument flows logically. Now, my final thoughts on this entire podcast episode. Why researching instead of searching makes you smarter. At the end of the day, researching isn't just about school, it's a skill that will help you to think critically so you don't fall for misinformation. It will help you to form strong arguments, whether for essays, debates, or real-world discussions. And researching is a skill that will help you develop independent thought so you can form your own educated opinions. And here's the best part. The more you practice researching, the more natural it becomes, the easier it becomes, and the better you become. Have you ever realized after submitting a paper that you relied too much on a quick search? I have. Have you? What's been your biggest challenge in researching? Send me a message. Let's talk about it. Maybe it's something I can help you out with. I'm Mr. Hutchings, and I really enjoyed this episode. And thank you for tuning in for this episode of Mr. Hutchings History. Please like, subscribe, and share. I could use that YouTube money, and you, my friend, can use more of me. I'll talk to you later. Bye.